Hello, I hope this thing is working. My internet is going to allow any such live expeditions. We'll see. Sitting here in the cabin, got lantern and candlelight, and um, here alone, Danielle has gone to Amarillo because her father is ill. He's 82 years old and he's in the intensive care unit. So, anyways, this is one of those times, happens quite often, every month or so, where I'm home by myself. And sometimes I take those opportunities to do a little more kind of preparedness ideas, practice sort of things. I don't know about you, but my image here is pretty poor, probably because of the light. But if you're out there, and I'm going to see if I can see your messages. Type in a message and let me know how things are looking. Hello, Adam in Missouri. I got some things I want to talk about, but I want to kind of give some people time to show up. And if anybody's going to show up, I have no idea. You never know with these sort of things. But if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them into the chat or just say hi or let me know how the visual is. And hello, Mars. Great to see you. Also, put in where you're watching from. So, anyways, Danielle's up in Amarillo, and so a lot of times these trips happen on kind of the last notice. We don't really know. So we had been working on getting all the cars, trying to get the cars repaired and registered and whatnot, and so then her dad got sick, and so we kind of live off from the earth anyway, and so we don't usually have a lot of money, and a lot of times we haven't gone grocery shopping, and what that does is it gives me an opportunity to practice a lot of the things that I preach. So I am here for 4 days. We didn't go grocery shopping at all, didn't buy a single thing, and so I am going to be doing some fun stuff, stuff that I like to do anyway. And that is just basically living off the stuff that we've already prepared, stuff in the root cellar. I've got some, I went down the root cellar about an hour ago and pulled out some things for me to eat tomorrow. I'm going to make some bread, maybe bake some bread over a fire. And, that's another thing is we just happen to be running out of propane right at the time that all this happened. So I've got the wood burner, but I think there's a little bit of propane left in the stove, but I probably won't use it very much. So Mars asked, got any small beer? No, I don't have any beer at all that I know of. I think I should go look in the icebox. There might be a stray stranded beer in there. I've got some homemade bourbon and some wine. That's about it. And I don't have any opportunity because I don't even have a vehicle, so I can't go to town and get any beer. But I actually have some beer that's in the fermenter, but I need to bottle it. I may do that Sunday, and then it'll take another week before it's ready to drink. So, but she'll be home by then. She'll be home by Monday. So we'll see how all that goes. Kind of gritty looking video. Yeah, I think it's just the lack of light. It's actually kind of pleasant in here right now with the, and I'm sorry that this table is creaky. It shows up on a lot of videos, kind of creaky. Hey, if you're out there and you're watching, just kind of say hi in the chat if you know how to use the chat. I do have some things written down here to kind of talk about, but wanted to give an opportunity for people to come and visit if they're going to visit. If you have any questions, though, things you want me to talk about, type them into the chat, and we'll get to those. So this is my some of my homemade bourbon. It's always good in a pinch. It's actually as good as any bourbon you'd buy at the store. So, like I said, this is an opportunity for me to practice a lot of the things that I preach. And we used to do this all the time when the children were younger, and there were 6 of us here. um, every year we did the whole month of December and sometimes November and December or December and January. So we would do 2 months, an old fashioned, like Mad Men. Yeah, so we would take a month or 2 months a year, and we would not go to the store at all. We would not leave the property. We wouldn't. We basically forced ourselves to live as if some systemic situation had happened, and most people, a lot of people out there, don't think anything like that could happen, and that's because they're stupid and they have no historical reference or any historical context, and so we believe that you can go out and enjoy anything you want to enjoy, but you ought to know how to do these things and not live this way, and it ought not be a shocking surprise if you have to go a month or 2 months or 6 months or a year or the rest of your life without the use of going to the store or store-bought products. And so, since we were always living this way, we would take about 1 or 2 months of the year, and we would we called it the December project, no matter what month it was, and we just wouldn't go to town at all. And so, a lot of that was, preparing and making sure that we had the ability to produce. We have the animals on the hoof, so we have rabbits, goats, sheep. We have cows, chickens, rabbits. We've got all those things on the hoof are food that you want to manage and have available. And so then we've got animals that we've butchered that are canned and put into the root cellar or stored in some other way, bacon or ham or some other salted. And then so when I start talking about these things, there's a large kind of broad cross section of people who might be listening, who have maybe some interest or some expertise in one particular area, but the way we live and the way we've done this kind of intersects a lot of different areas, like preppers, survivalists, bushcrafters, homesteaders, off-gridders, gardeners. We kind of intersect all of those different areas. But the basic philosophy, which we call the bunker principle, is that you have the ability at any time and the skills at any time to not make use of any particular element, any particular store-bought industrial consumer product or service, or living off grid is one thing, and I'll get into that because that can mean so many different things. A lot of them aren't even related. But how do you provide light, as I'm doing here tonight, without we haven't been hooked up to the electrical grid in 13, 14 years. How would we do that, right now? So for example, here's a pillar candle. The angle is bad, but it's a lit candle. There's another one behind me. And we have the ability, and I do make candles. I've made a video. If you check out my videos, there's a video on making kind of quick and easy candles. If you have bees, you can get wax, and there's other ways you can make tallow candles. I also here have a kerosene lantern. There's several of those here around the room. And then you ask yourself, the next question is, what if I can't get kerosene? What if I can't get the materials that to make candles? How would I do this with the materials that are available? How would I provide light? And so I have intended to make a video. I think I'm going to do one on off-grid lighting or survival lighting, which will include fat lamps and those type of things, which we're adept at. We store a lot of lard, which can be used for fat lamps and bacon grease and that kind of thing. A lot of the people that first came across the American continent, especially in places like Oklahoma, where there weren't a lot of trees and there wasn't a lot of fuel, um, and they couldn't get access to whale blubber, which was the main lighting source on the coasts. Would make lard lamps, and so I want to show how to do that. But the point is that the bunker principle is that you work your way backwards. So with a lot of people who don't live this lifestyle, maybe you live in a town or a suburb, you might have a generator. So your first step is, what do I do if the lights go out? What if I can't power the freezer? What if I can't power, something even important like a piece of equipment or something like that? And so you might have a generator for fallback. That puts you kind of in the prepper category where you are trying to moderate any loss of a service or provision or something like that. And then you go to another step where you go, okay, well, what if I don't have the generator? What if I have to um, what things are now necessary to me for living, as far as me trying to get by without a generator? And then those steps keep going, and then you kind of get into you go beyond the prepper stage. Now the prepper stage is generally you buy the means of the fallback means. So whatever means you're going to fall back to with the loss. And this sounds crazy to most people because they have no sense of world history and no sense that it's possible that these services could not be available for 2-3 days or for a year or for forever. But historically, they have been lost before for very long periods of time. And, empires collapse. And so in that prepper stage, you're kind of, you're trying to figure out ways to pre-purchase. So you're not actually leaving the economic system that is bound to fail. You're just using it in advance. You're pre-positioning industrial and made goods and items so that you have access to them. And so maybe you buy candles, maybe you buy lighters, maybe you buy backpacks, maybe you buy dehydrated food, and all that's fine. And I don't dissuade anybody from doing those things, but you do need to recognize that you are only theoretically establishing yourself X days better than the system that is type of natural disaster, or it is something that happens because we are in a period of very serious political instability, and so there's a lot of things that could happen, and those things. But as long as you're in the prepper stage, you're generally, not always, some people get mad at me saying this, you're generally operating out of fear of loss. And fear of loss causes a lot of emotional stresses, and practice helps eliminate emotional stresses. And so then you can kind of get into a survivalist mentality, which is, okay, how would I do without even those things? How can I use my research? Bushcrafter is kind of falls into this category too. And some people who are bushcrafters have no sense that they're doing it because of a pending collapse of society. They may just enjoy it. They may like making stuff out of wood, and going out into the woods with a knife and an axe or something. But at the same time, those skills are valuable to learn so that you can provide for yourself. And so, then you have your homesteaders, and a homesteader is generally somebody who has kind of passed through maybe those stages, and now they're in a position where they're like, I need to be able to produce. And this is a wholesale change from the previous stages. The previous stages don't really depart from the consumer status. In other words, you're still a consumer. A prepper is still a consumer. He's somebody who's not producing anything generally. They are buying materials using the commercial system, industrial system to pre-position materials. And again, don't think I'm saying there's anything wrong with that. There's not. But it is important that you recognize pardon me, the inherent frailties of that system. And so when you get into homesteading, you are now asking the question, how can I become a producer? How can I produce more of what I consume? And therefore, with consumption is dependence, and you are dependent in direct relation to how much consumption you have that is not offset by production. So you can do the math yourself. If you consume 100, if 100% of what you consume you do not produce, in other words, you purchase it, then your dependency is 100%. And if you're you can take that 100% dependency and you might be able to stretch it a few more days, a few more weeks, a few more months. But without production, there's no added, you can't add to that time period. And so knowledge and skills allow you to add to that time period. Now, I know people are sitting out there and they want to go into the range of, well, you can't control anything. Some guy, pardon me, guy with more guns or somebody's going to take all your stuff. That's a cop out. Historically, it's a logicless assertion. And so the people who historically, even in Israel, when the majority of Israel went into bondage in Babylon or wherever they went, there were people left in the land who produced, even after everything was destroyed, all the cities were destroyed, they were all put to fire. There were people left in the land to produce food, and the people who had the skills to do that survived. It's a silly assertion from people who are weak-minded because they want a rationalization to not produce. You don't need one. If you don't want to produce, just don't. You're a free person. But the idea that somehow, because you're saying, I'm not going to grow anything because someone's just going to come take it from me, that's just a logicless, contextless, ahistorical assertion. And so with homesteading, you get to the point where you're considering production. And in homesteading, I'll get to that question in a minute, Adam. He asked about planning on growing anything new this year. I just plan on growing more this year, more of everything. I hope. I have dreams, and so within homesteading, you still have a consumption-based system of homesteading, where you're still going and buying everything, but maybe you're still engaged or locked or entrapped in the modern commercial system. So you decided you're going to go start a homestead, but you've done so because you want to sell greens to the local grocery, and you want to sell rabbits to somebody, and you can be a homesteader and still not have the skills, know-how, or knowledge or productive ability to produce the things that you consume. So hopefully in homesteading, you start working into an area where you're actually starting to produce some of the things that you consume. That percentage then, it's a sliding scale. So you can go from 100% consumer to 100% producer, which is not likely, but it's been done and it can be done, and it might have to be done. The bunker principle comes in at this point, and that is that in all of these things, in all of these areas of necessities, you look at your whatever the thing is, making coffee, chopping wood, making candles, egg production, and you walk it backwards and you say, okay, the most independent way to do this is with zero input from the commercial industrial system. In other words, not buying any food and all of those things. And Mars says, spending this year building up the soil. Excellent plan. But you're working at what is you're going to kind of lost my place where I was, but you're looking at your production, your ability to produce, and you're saying, okay, if I had to go to the ultimate extreme and I had to do this, raise chickens with no outside food production, outside food purchasing. No, I'm not going to be locked to the feed store. How would I do that? Okay, well, I need to grow grains, say. Okay, how would I do that? Well, if I'm going to use a tractor, if I'm going to use a tiller, and then I'm locked into the production of fuels or the consumption of fuels, and you just keep walking it backward till you actually get to a scale where you could do it, and you know how to do it, and you practice doing it, and you can do it without any outside input. Okay, so maybe I can keep 25 chickens alive off of a half-acre grain plot plus free ranging plus I'm catching fish and I'm feeding the livers and all of that kind of stuff to the chickens, and some addendums to their or additions to their food. I figure what that is, and then do it. And then from that, once you know how to do it and you know you can do it with the resources that are available, then there's no problem if you want to go buy feed at the store. We started this place out. One of the first things we did is we built a root cellar, and our soil, you go about 5 feet deep, and it's just bedrock. I mean, it's 8 to 10 inches deep rock, and just a complete strata of rock. And so that was kind of hey, Gerald, that was kind of a mind siege, because you dig down and you get down there and you're like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to get through this rock. And so at that point we could have said, okay, we're going to go get a backhoe and we're going to dig out this hole. And that's what most people will do. But what we did is we said, okay, this hole, 12 by 12 hole, we're not going to do that. We're going to figure out if we have to do this after the collapse of society, or if we have to do this because we're broke and we just don't have the ability to do it. We need to know how to do it. So we went and we got rock breakers and old used and sledgehammers, and that's another step. You need to go in and go, okay, how could I do this if I didn't have this tool or that tool? But we both broke through that rock by hand. We lifted that rock out of there by hand, and we built a root cellar. So after that, we dug another hole right over here for our cistern, which was basically the same dimensions, and we got a backhoe because we know we can do it. We know how to do it. We know what hardships come up when you try to do it. So that's kind of what the bunker principle is. And you run into that at some level of homesteading. In addition, homesteading can be totally on grid. I mean, there's a lot of people that homestead that are completely on grid. So they still have these expenses that are inherently intertwined with being on grid, whether it's electric bill, water bill, whatever else. And that's fine too. And then you can go off grid where you decide either, and then that breaks off into two categories. You can provide an alternative grid where you use solar, wind, or some other power source, or you can say, hey, we don't want to do that. We don't want to incur that cost. And then you can go totally beyond off grid, like we live here, where you don't have an alternative grid. That doesn't mean we don't have access to batteries, but I don't need to use this. I can live without it. I can live without that lantern. And so that's basically how the bunker principle is applied. Once you get into off-grid, of course, it divides into people that are off-grid, like Bill Gates, perhaps, who use brute force money application to provide their own alternative grid. And then you have people who don't do that, who live completely off-grid without that alternative grid. And so there was an article I read the other day where some guy who'd been living off grid for 10 years or 20 years or something was saying that he loved his life off grid, but it was 4 or 5 times as expensive as living on grid. And this was supposed to be some kind of epiphany, but it should have been, everybody reading it should have gone, duh. I mean, it's the economy of scale. It's certainly easier to provide the electricity needed for someone to live in the modern world in the modern way when you're providing that electricity to 6 million people than to do it by yourself, to build your own grid where you live the exact same way, but you're only providing it to one person. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to even be. I don't know why this was even written. I mean, it's a lot cheaper for me to buy candles that are made um, a billion at a time. You know, they sell them at Walmart, and I can get them for 4 or 6 cents. You know, the little tea lights or whatever. Than for me to do that myself, to make that myself is going to be tremendously more than 4 or 5 times more expensive. It's going to be a whole lot more expensive, even in labor or whatever your cost is. And so the idea that somehow people think that you're going to produce an alternative grid, you're going to live the same way you lived when you were on grid, but somehow it's going to be cheaper is a ridiculous idea. I was so beside myself reading it that this guy, after all these years, had come to this epiphany that somehow this was an expensive way to live. Come on, you know, and that's why 2000 or so, I wrote a book, or maybe 2010, called Surviving Off Grid, that basically said you can't really afford to do that unless you're rich. If you're poor, you have to do it another way. You have to stop making use of that other system. Stop having bills, stop having an electric bill, stop having I've got a phone bill that I pay every month, and I do have a small solar power system down at the office that I use to charge things, but I can't afford to live the way that most of you live, and not, have a full-time job, because I would have to pay for all of that. So, that's the thing. That's the root of it. And so this all started with me saying that I'm here because Danielle's gone to Amarillo with the car, and, it was a last minute trip and we don't have stuff. What happens? What happens when you're stuck here for 4, 5, 30 days, 80 days, 90 days, a year? And this could happen without any type of cataclysm. This could happen philosophically, for religious reasons. The way things are going in the world system, they could come out tomorrow and say, oh, if you don't have this chip, or if you don't do this, we're not going to let you use money anymore. I mean, we're right there on the use of money. So everybody just says that we're not taking cash anymore. We're not going to use cash, and we're only going to use credit, or we're only going to use Bitcoin or something. And perhaps maybe that's something I don't want to do. Maybe I don't want to take that step with the rest of the world. So that could happen at any time. But the whole point is, here I am. And so I've got 4 days where I don't have a car and I can't go to town. We got plenty of food. I've got traps set out, and I've got food in the root cellar, and I've got potatoes and skills. The skills are the most valuable thing, but it is an exercise. It's an exercise in going, okay, I'm gonna think about this, and here's what I want to practice. And that's really, hey, by the way, if you guys have any questions or comments, do put them in the, I don't know if I've missed any, but I did want to talk about those things, but just put your questions or comments in the chat. I'm sitting here, I'm having a homemade bourbon, and so I was out last weekend, and I took a couple of day job grilling steaks at a really high falutin foo restaurant that's out in the country, and got talking with a guy out there, and he was telling me about chopping wood, and he said, I used to chop wood a lot, and he said one day I went out and I would go out and I would just chop wood all day. And if you chop wood all day and you pile it all up, you can look at that pile at the end of the day and you know what you did. And he said, that feeling was as good to me as making $1 million. Well, I've never made $1 million, so I have no way to compare, but I suspect that he's right. And I know there's a lot of people that will go, oh, trust me, I'll take the $1 million. But I'm not that way. I've done a lot of things to not make money, and done a lot of things that would guarantee that I don't make money. Not because I avoid money or I wouldn't like it if somebody gave me $1 million, I would certainly appreciate it. But the point is that he's exactly right. And I responded to him and I said, there's these levels that you kind of attain when you live like we live. And I can remember the first time we ever got an egg from a chicken, and running into the house and going, oh, we got an egg. Oh, let's make an egg sandwich or something. And that feeling of elation in having produced something. Granted, this was a commercial chicken that was given to us, and we bought chicken feed and all of that, but for that moment compared to what the rest of my life had been like, then you kind of go to the next stage where, we kind of expanded our chicken operation, and we were raising our own food for the chickens. We were getting 3-4 dozen eggs a day. And then you get other animals. And then, we had a meal with a pork chop and an egg and, 3 or 4 other items, even the beverage. 100% of it had come from the land. That's the next level. That's a higher level of elation where you just, you cannot explain it to anybody if they have not experienced it. Even if they've experienced getting that egg, they don't know what it feels like to eat a meal where from bottom to top you produced everything on the plate. Perhaps, maybe not the salt and pepper. And then you get to levels beyond that where you're making very involved things like cheeses or whiskey, and pardon me. And so I said to him, when you get to that stage, I can sit back and I can remember going, what do I not have that Solomon had? The richest, wisest man in the world. I'm poor, but I'm not missing anything. I don't have, Solomon had a bunch of wives, but that was a lot of headache and heartache, and was his downfall. But there's nothing that I'm missing. I have a roof over my head. I have this sense of joy in production and in the Lord's wisdom in all of those things. And so that's kind of where I was going with all of this, is that I like to go back even when I'm forced to on occasion, and relearn these lessons and re-experience them. And so I guess if nobody has any questions, I'll give it a minute here. If you have any questions, type them in. If not, it's been great being here with you. Enjoying a beverage and chatting about these things. I'll give it about 30 more seconds. Type in a question if you have one. Any question about anything you want to talk about. It could be homesteading, off-gridding, bushcrafting, survivalism, philosophy, history. But if not, in about 20 seconds, I'm going to cut it off. And enjoy the candlelight evening here. I'll probably make a video tomorrow where I cook some sort of meal off grid, and then I'll put that up. I'll try to be creative. All right, y'all. It's been great. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Anybody watching this, if you are watching it and you are not subscribed, please go down and click the subscribe button. Click on the little bell icon, because that means that you'll get alerts when I'm doing live videos like this. Okay, so now that I'm signing off, I get a question. Which animal gives the most bang for the effort? Chickens? Pigs are second, for sure. Cattle comes after that. All right, y'all. Anyways, the other thing I was going to tell you is share this with people. There's some philosophy in there some people might want to hear. Great to see you all.